Haneen Hassan. She has a master's in political science and in linguistics. She has 7 years of experience working on human rights violations in areas of conflict, with a focus on refugees and internally displaced persons. Ms. Hassan has served as a consultant to numerous projects on human rights in the MENA region and is currently a researcher at the EuroMid Observer for Human Rights. And she will be discussing the case of Palestine for us. So, thank you, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being here. First of all, I would like to say that for me to be here today, it took me literally 32 days, simply because I was in the Gaza Strip and Israel was blocking. We are under siege for 7 years, and Israel is blocking the way for us to enter and exit the Gaza Strip. So in order to come to a conference or try to work or try to do any kind of movement for the Palestinian case, we have to plan in advance and apply for permits to exit every single time. Having said that, I'm sure my story isn't different. You've heard this before. We have been saying this for 65 years as Palestinians. Today, the United Nations Human Rights Council is discussing Palestine. They will come at the end of the day, hopefully, with a new decision or a resolution that will add up to the previous resolutions and reports and documents against the Israeli violations with little change on the ground. I must admit, it's very frustrating being in the building of the United Nations, where actually human rights should be respected, and having to go back home in the Gaza Strip under siege and seeing how actually none of it is real and none of it is happening. I am one of 7 million Palestinian refugees in the world, of which have been wandering the world for 65 years, and there are another 800,000 refugees for the past 46 years due to the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The tragic consequences for the Palestinian people have been documented in literally hundreds of official reports issued by international, regional, and national agencies, NGOs, governments, UN bodies, European Parliament, name it, they have reported about it. Warnings about resulting human rights abuses and destruction of the Palestinian life, economy, and land have accelerated every year by the Israelis, raising the same alarms every year, adding a new layer of statistics. Yet, unfortunately, with one recent exception, which is the European Commission announcement that in 2014 it will withhold its money, its financial instrument from Israeli entities that operate in the occupied Palestinian territories, little action has followed. All this condemnation. Just to give you a short overview of the reports that have been issued only in the past year, so I will not go 65 years back, I will just mention the last year. Reports came from the United Nations bodies condemning the legalized discrimination against Palestinians overall, and especially in East Jerusalem. So the United Nations have condemned that, human rights organizations have also condemned that, the European Parliament have also condemned all of this, including the Israeli abuses of our water resources, the expansion of settlement activity, the illegality of the siege on the Gaza Strip, the deploring Palestinian economy under the occupation, the illegal demolition of Palestinian homes, the internal displacement of Palestinians, the violations of many freedoms, including the freedom of movement, the deplorable condition of prisoners, the deplorable condition of minors, of arbitrary minors, the arrests of minors in Israeli jails, some of which are under the age of 15. This is not new. This is a policy of Israel that has been going on for 65 years. Today, at the end of the day, another report will come. It will add up to all of this report and obviously end up in some archive. And this is why we demand for people to turn and take action. It's not a lack of reports, it's not a lack of UN resolutions, it's a lack of actually good faith and will from the international community to sanction Israel and to hold it responsible and accountable for all the human rights violations that have been documented by legal bodies. I would like to just give you some short violations that have been documented and that nothing happened with. The UN in September 2011 has reported to its ad hoc liaison committee that a fundamental rolling back of the occupation is essential. So despite this report, the objective was not achieved. Instead, what has happened is a slowdown in the easing of restriction on movement and, of course, an increased demolition of Palestinian infrastructure and displacement of Palestinians. Furthermore, there's a significant settlement activity in the occupied Palestinian territories, which actually is in violation of UN resolutions, of the Declaration of Human Rights, of the Geneva Conventions. But since it's Israel, Israel can go on with impunity. No one is there to stop it. There is something actually very intense, and that affects the lives of Palestinians in the worst way, sometimes even worse than when Israel attacks us with bombs, and that is the discrimination because of your skin color and your religion that is taking place in Palestine. So we are being discriminated for not being Jews under the occupation in the state of Israel. There is a documented document that was issued by the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination that they object the citizen and entry law of Israel that prohibits, with rare exceptions, the reunification of families who have been members living in both Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. Which means that if I have an aunt that lives in Jaffa in Israel and she's a Palestinian, she's a Muslim Palestinian carrying an Israeli passport, and I'm a Palestinian living in the Gaza Strip under siege, I am not allowed to go see her. If something happens to her, I am not allowed to go and see her simply because I'm not a Jew. This is the core of apartheid. This is not acceptable under any kind of humanitarian international law, and it has been documented. Nothing has been done with it, and it continues. There are areas that we cannot enter that Israel restricts to us as buffer zones or are bypass roads. There are many terminology. These roads are only for Israelis. They're not meant for Arabs, as they refer to us, or the indigenous people that are not allowed into certain areas. So there's racism that is taking place and affecting our lives in the most demeaning way that will have actually consequences for generations to come. Regardless of the public welfare that is suffering, according to UN OCHA, as of July 2013, 57 of Gaza's households are food insecure, and about 80% are aid recipients. That means that 1.2 million people in Gaza need aid in order to survive. That's a tremendous number, and people should really stop and realize what that means. That you are a generation of refugees. You were born as a fourth generation of refugee into a camp in the Gaza Strip. It is not your fault. You're born into this. You're 10 years old today. You have survived the Israeli war in 2008. You've survived the latest Israeli attack in November 2012, and you live under siege, and you're 10 years old. Imagine what kind of consequences that has into an entire population. Even the World Health Organization calls and names the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip a traumatized society. That means it will take decades for them to just be able to process what Israel is putting them through. There is also the access of water. Growing up, we only had access to water on Tuesdays, because 6 days in the week the water was meant for the settlers. And growing up, we used to think as children that the color of water is supposed to be yellow. So when you open the tap, it's supposed to come on Tuesdays, and it's supposed to be yellow. It turned out that we would receive the remainings of the waters coming from the settlements only once a week. So Israel decides how often we are allowed to drink per day and how often we are allowed to shower. So occupation is not only violence, it goes into your system as a human being. It has huge psychological effects, and it's a traumatizing process. Also, of course, the access to water has been deplored by the United Nations. They have said that Israel is using 86% of the water that is supposed to be for the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So almost 86% of our water. That means that almost 5 million people in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip live on what, 20% of the water? How are you supposed to survive? And the water is actually, it's unhealthy. It causes diseases that you gain because of you drink water from a tap that is contaminated, and then you live under siege. So there is no medication that can come into the Gaza Strip. You cannot get cured, and it goes on and on and on like this. The land use, of course, the confiscation of Palestinian land. The overwhelming majority of the United Nations General Assembly support the creation of a Palestinian state defined by pre-1967 borders. Yes, Israeli practices in Area C, which is supposed to be part of the state of Palestine, have rendered the likelihood of creating a Palestinian state based on these borders impossible. The international community considers Israeli activities as a direct violation of international law. In May 2012, the EU, the European Union's Foreign Affairs Council, called on Israel to meet its obligation in Area C, including an accelerating approval of Palestinian master plans and halting forced transfer of population and demolition of Palestinian housing and infrastructure. I know these are technical terms, but on the ground it means that there's a road for Israelis that I cannot use, and there's a road for me, an Arab, that is not as good as the Israeli one, that is actually on a very more dangerous, around a certain mountain, and we have to take bypass road to reach a 15 minutes away house in 3 or 4 hours. It means I need 30 days to exit, while if I had an airport in the Gaza Strip, I would be in Geneva in 5 hours. This is what it means to be occupied. East Jerusalem is a case apart. The people there are being discriminated to the extent that children cannot go to schools because Israel refuses to register them as inhabitants of East Jerusalem, which is part of the ethnic cleansing of East Jerusalem and taking the entire city. Once again, according to a 2013 UN Human Rights Council report, 33% of Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem lack building permits, and at least 93,000 residents are at risk of being displaced. The result, of course, is poverty. It's a lack of education. It's a demolition policy. Palestinians have to exit their homes and then just face their fate. When you get a warrant from Israel that they will bomb your house or they will demolish it, you actually also have to pay for the demolition of your own house. So you get a letter that we are about to demolish your house because you don't have a permit, which they don't give you because they want to ethnically cleanse you. And then they will give you the bill. They tell you, for us to bring a bulldozer and bomb your house or bring it down, it will cost you this amount, which you will have to pay, or you will face charges. It's a process that is incredibly demeaning to the humanity of almost 5 million people. We have prisoners, countless of prisoners. Since 1967, around 700,000 Palestinians have seen Israeli jails from the inside. That means that approximately every family has someone who has spent an amount of days of years in Israeli jails. The Universal, of course, Declaration of Human Rights, the 4th Geneva Convention, the protection of civilians, persons in times of war of 1948, all of these conventions have been violated. The UN International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights has been violated. The UN Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women have been violated by Israel. The UN Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment for Punishment have been violated. And finally, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child have been violated by Israel. We know this. I'm not saying anything new, we know it. So now what? Do we wait for the end of the day when another report will come today condemning Israel, demanding it to live up to its democratic values, which obviously they don't have? I think that the United Nations can do much more than just write reports. They can actually practice what they preach. If you practice human rights, then push that country to respect them. You can send missions to Israel and call Israel to comply with the 4th Geneva Convention. You can oblige Israel to cease all settlement activities without preconditions, or they will have to face sanctions. These policies have been applied on other countries. Israel is not any different than any other country that violates human rights. The UN should immediately initiate a process of withdrawal of all settlers from the occupied Palestinian territories. They should not give Israel excuses, they should just apply international law. And countries that make this possible should stop. The European Union is actually making the occupation possible by paying, by maintaining it. And they should simply try to stick to the 2nd article of the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which is based on mutual respect between the European Union and Israel. So if Israel doesn't stick to human rights, there are procedures and there are steps that the European Union could take to force Israel. What I'm trying to say is, all of these reports, they have highlighted all facets of Israeli control on Palestinian land and people, each now stretched to a breaking point that cannot be sustained any longer. And it is past time to progress beyond words into action. I think that 65 years is a long time. I think that Israel has had many, many warnings. I think we should not wait for another 9 months when the United States will try to forge another peace process that will obviously not succeed given the past history of Israel. And it's time, the timing is ripe for international and European governing bodies to play the role the United States cannot do to its internal political climate, that of enforcer. If you preach human rights, then please respect them. And this is all we're asking. Thank you.